Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here in Freiburg, Germany, and I got my friend here who we're going to discuss a few things that have to do with linguistics. My friend here is a professor in linguistics, so we're going to have a discussion in terms of how linguistics can be appropriate in terms of research, but more importantly, in terms of jurisprudence where it comes from Africa. So, welcome, my brother.
Thank
You
you.
can introduce yourself.
My name is Owen Edwards. I'm from Australia originally, but I'm currently living in Freiburg, and I do research on languages of Indonesia in particular.
Right. So, tell me something about what's your passion? Where do you get the passion to do linguistics?
I first got the passion to do linguistics when I was at school.
Yes.
I was studying German as a foreign language. And I got fascinated in it because the way German is structured is different to my native language, English.
Yes.
And I noticed similarities and differences.
As a scholar of linguistics, is it true that English was generated or invented because of the correlation between German and French? Is that right?
So English is a Germanic language by its roots, so it's most closely related to German, to Dutch, to Swedish.
Yes.
But it has a lot of influence from French.
Okay.
Because England was, I guess, conquered by the Normans who spoke French. But at its root, it is a Germanic language, which has had a lot of influence in French. Lots of loan words, and also the structure has changed.
So, in terms of originality, which, in terms of also maybe invasion of language, can you explain to me how this language were invaded? What's the etymology of language?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So all languages develop over time and change over time. So we don't know the very origin of English. There wasn't one point at which it was invented,
right?
But it has relatives, so it's related to Germanic languages most closely. Then other languages of Europe, so the Romance languages like French and Italian.
Right.
Also to Slavic languages like Russian more distantly.
Yes.
And then also to languages in India, such as Hindi.
Yes.
So all these languages together form one family, which is called the Indo-European language family.
Yes.
And that originates maybe somewhere in the Middle East, thousands of years ago.
Wow.
So originally there was one language, and as people who spoke it spread out, the language changed and became different.
And when you say originally there was one language, what language was that?
I don't know, because the history of humans is thousands of years.
Okay.
And with linguistics, we can only really, because of the rate at which language changes, we can only reach back in time to a certain extent. Humans have been speaking languages for much longer than our methods of linguistics allow us to see.
As a person who does colorism in languages, what is your biggest fear today?
My biggest fear is language endangerment, because with the globalized world, lots of languages which are spoken by only a small number of people are going extinct as those people learn a national language. So in Indonesia, lots of people are learning Indonesian, and they are all no longer learning their traditional languages.
Right. And that's of course being affected because of the globalization of the world, not so? The one world system that is probably taking over, but also the perhaps capitalist influence. I don't know what better word to use, because then, especially from where I come from Africa, many of the languages we speak or we take as national languages have to do with a lot of our colonial masters. So that influence kind of is passed over. And then you are right when you say that many of these languages are actually being endangered. And what is your proposition as a researcher in linguistics? What remedies do you have for that?
As a linguist, I personally don't have any remedies. I think it's up to the speakers, Indigenous people, to maintain their language. So it needs to be spoken by the parents so that the children will learn it.
Right.
And I think also there's often a misconception. People think that they need to speak the national language to their children so that they can have success at school and education. But children can grow up multilingual and bilingual.
Absolutely.
You will know this from Africa.
Absolutely.
People can grow up speaking multiple languages.
Absolutely.
And in fact, research has shown that children who grow up bilingual actually do better at education because they have more tools at their disposal.
And I would imagine they have that innate kind of reasoning. Because I think even when we're in schools, we could realize that the kids who were original in nature ended up performing better in a way. And those who were not original in nature made up co-opting or perhaps adapting or perhaps copying, becoming photocopies. And also, I think one other tool that is important in terms of language is that it's a proposition of terms of development. I'll give an example. Every country that has actually thrived on the natural language in terms of the skills, in terms of education, ended up becoming better because, I don't know why, because let's go for example China. The Chinese, I know they were colonized by the British, but because most of their things are done in Chinese way, they ended up, propagating on that. Russians on the other hand, Americans on the other hand, English on the other hand, French on the other hand, Germans on the other hand. That becomes a problem for us Africans. Because what happens in Africa is that we depend on our colonial masters. And when we speak anything that is non-English, then the argument is, quote unquote, that perhaps we're not educated. What's your comment on that?
I think that's absolutely a misconception that you need to speak English or some global language in order to be educated.
Right.
And in fact, many of these languages have their own. Every language captures a whole lot of knowledge about a particular area and place.
Right.
So in Indonesia, for instance, many of these languages which are going extinct, there's lots of terminology for the environment, for instance, when they're spoken.
Right.
And as these languages disappear, a lot of that knowledge disappears as well.
Right.
And if they're speaking a language which is externally imposed and isn't appropriate for that area, then it doesn't fit.
I know.
So a lot of indigenous knowledge gets lost in our
Absolutely. And one of the things I think we need to do is to protect our natural languages, like you say. From where I come from, I wrote a book called Ubuntu Bulamu and the Law. The argument here is to try to retain. What happened is we had what they call the Oden Council. When the British colonized us in Uganda, they came with what they call the inception clause. So everything that was quote unquote natural or original or African was surrendered at the expense of what was foreign. And now we began, adapting to that kind of colonial system. And that has stifled because the argument was that whatever was nugatory or whatever was inconsistent was repugnant in terms of foreign culture. So I agree with you that it's time, I think, that every nation comes up and resurrects or reincarnates the originality of where they come from, because we are diverse in unity. I think that's quite important. What impresses you perhaps about, I would like you to call African, because I come from the background. What impresses you in terms of language? Do you know anything about African language?
Yeah, Africa is an extremely linguistically diverse place.
Yes.
There are many language families in Africa, and I think that it is something really valuable and really good that African nations do, is valuing their linguistic diversity. So I know, for instance, South Africa has many official languages.
Yes.
Not just one official language.
Right.
So many indigenous languages are valued.
Excellent.
And this is something that Africa does really well, which isn't so much the case in Europe, for instance. So in France, there are several languages spoken in France, but then only French is the official language. And the same in France's colonies, like in New Caledonia.
Right.
Many indigenous languages, but French is the only national language.
Right. Excellent. Well, that's a pleasure, and I know this is my friend, so you will introduce yourself a little bit more. Where do you teach?
At the moment, I'm working at the University of Cologne. Okay,
University of Cologne.
Yeah.
Right, in Germany.
In Germany.
Okay, excellent. I come from Uganda, and I'm actually doing my doctorate in law. At the same time, a doctorate in philosophy in law, but also a PhD in law. So I'm doing three at the same time.
Doing three at the same time.
Yes, sir. So that's it. God bless you. Thank you.